Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial we're going to look at the SQL updates in JSTL, and we're also going to take a look at the transaction tag in JSTL. So I've implemented some new stuff in this site, but all of it is just HTML, CSS, or it's stuff that we've already covered in these tutorials. So I'm not going to go into that because it would kind of take too long to explain, and it's kind of veering off the topic anyway. But basically I've got this form on this image page, and you can select a ranking for your image, click OK, and it displays a new average ranking that I've calculated here using some expression language. Now the thing that's not working is I've actually got in my database a column for the total number of rankings and the average ranking for this image at the moment. And what I want to do is update these values when the user submits the form. And just to be clear, what's happening is when I submit this form, it submits to my controller servlet, but that servlet then says, okay, you've submitted this form, we'll go back to the same page again, and I want to put some SQL on this very same page to update the database with a new ranking. And of course there's all kinds of things that I could do here. I could make it that it's the kind of ID of the ranked image is stored in the session in a map, so that the user can't then vote on the same image twice and that sort of thing. But I'm not going to worry about these details here. I'm just going to focus on the one bit that I want to cover in this tutorial basically. So if I submit the form, it submits an action parameter called rate, and then there's a CIF tag here that says, okay, you've submitted the form, therefore we need to update the ranking, and it calculates a new ranking right here using some expression language. And I need a couple of SQL updates here, update statements, to update the average ranking and to update the total number of rankings for this image. And don't worry about all this talk about rankings if it's driving you crazy, because the real point here is just to take some value and update the database with it. Now if you've got any kind of SQL that doesn't return values, then what you have is a SQL update, and for that you don't use the SQL query tag, you use the SQL update tag. So that looks like this, SQL : update, like that. And my SQL here, I'm going to say SQL equals update images, that's my image table, set average ranking equals wildcard, where ID, that's the ID of the image, equals wildcard. And the wildcards that I need are, well, one of them is going to be the image ID. Let's paste this in. And the first one is actually going to be my calculated new average ranking, which is here in a variable I set using JSTL. So let's paste that in. And I'll do Ctrl-Shift-F to format this page a bit. And I want another SQL update here that updates the total number of rankings. So that's going to look pretty similar. It's going to say update images, set rankings equals question mark, where ID equals question mark. And this is going to be image.rankings +1. And I've also fixed this up so that we retrieve the current average ranking for the image up here somewhere. Well, we retrieve it with this SQL query, and then I set that into a variable just here to store it. But then if I update the average ranking, I also update this variable right here so that I can then display it later on down the page, so the page shows an up-to-date current version of this, because just updating the database is not going to update the information that you've already retrieved from your database, if you see what I mean. So that's just a minor point really. So now this stuff should update my database. I'll do Ctrl-Shift-F again to format this. And in fact, let's just check it. Let's go to my database here. and I'll say I set the average ranking to 3 for all my images. Let's just do that again to make sure that it is done. So I'm going to set the average ranking and the number of rankings to 3 for all of my images. And let's say select star from images where average ranking is not equal to 3. And there's should be no results for this query. So we go 0 rows returned. Now let's run the application here. So I'll go to Eclipse and I'll select the application and run it. Run on server. And let's select an image, these glasses here. And let's rank this as good and click OK. Just expand this a bit. And oh, we've got an error here. Let's have a look at this. So if I could get rid of that, it would help. So I've got some problem right here, and it looks like, so there's an error on line 37. Let's just have a look at that. And I'll go to line 37 here in Eclipse. So I'll click on image.jsp, and looking down here at the bottom I can see the line, and on 37 in fact the problem I've got is I haven't specified a data source. It's missing. So let's say here data source equals ds, and go down here, and I think that's the only problem that there is as far as I can see. So we'll try again, save everything and run the application and run on server and select an image and rate it as good, and there we go. Let's check the database, and now we've updated, the number of rankings has gone from 3 to 4, and we've got an average ranking of 3.25, which hopefully is correct, because yeah, that sounds right, because we've got now total 4 rankings and 3 of them had the value 3, which makes 9. Add on 4, that makes 13, and divide 13 by 4 is 3.25. So that sounds good, doesn't it? Okay. Now there is still a problem here, however, and the problem is that you can imagine someone might load this page and it might get the current ranking and the current number of rankings, and then half an hour later they could submit to rank the image, and that would overwrite rankings that other users have submitted meanwhile for the same image. So what we want to do is we want to make sure, actually that's not strictly true, because when they select to rank the image, it will get the image information again, and it would then try to update that information. But there's actually there is going to be a split-second gap between getting the image information here and then updating it here. So actually I was talking rubbish a second ago, but what is true is definitely that someone could, the page could load, they could have clicked to rank the image, and this query could work, and meanwhile, like a bunch of other users in that split second could have also ranked the image, and then this user's page ranks the image and it overwrites what the other users have submitted. So what we really want ideally is to put this all in a transaction, so that this query and these updates happen in a single transaction which cannot be interrupted by other users submitting their ratings. And to do that we'll use the SQL transaction tag. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to put in SQL transaction like this, and I'm going to close the transaction tag after I've finished doing all my SQL. So all the SQL will happen in one single transaction. And this is supported in MySQL as long as you're using the I don't know how to pronounce it, but InnoDB engine, which I think these days is the default when you install it. And I'll format that with Control-Shift-F. Now, when you create a transaction in JSTL, you can only use one data source, so you can't specify a data source for each of your queries. And what you need to do is, instead of having a set data source tag here, just have this data source equals such and such in your transaction tag. Get rid of the set data source there, and then you no longer want the queries to specify a data source, so you have to get rid of this. So you just specify the data source for the transaction, and that transaction will use that data source for all the queries within it. And let's not mess up my tags. Oh yeah, I need that to Control-Shift-F. For some reason this yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah, I just left in a stray double quote. Okay, I think that's okay. So now we've got everything, all the SQL queries in the transaction tag, and we're specifying a data source. And I think if I run that, hopefully it will still work. And let's run this, run on server, and select an image like this, and I'll rate it like this, and click OK. And we should now have another re-ranked image in the database here. So we ranked potato now with 3.25. Okay, that's it for this tutorial, and until next time, happy coding.